Okay, last class for world history first semester, and we're looking at the overall change. So this is basically, we're going to summarize everything that we've learned so far from lesson 1, and we're going to look at what was the impact of all of those different things that we talked about throughout the class, right? So again, how did the world change from the 1500s to 1700s? Lots of times when we talk about history, we think of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, then we think of modern times. And there's this time in between that where you transition into what we think of as modern times. All right. So how did Europe's view of the world change during this time? Right. They had a view before exploration, and then how does this change as they start to explore the oceans? What changes do we see? What about Asia? What was Asia's view of the world? And how does their view change, right? We can look at Africa and what happens in Africa. We can also look at, of course, the Americas, right? And so all of these different areas are going to be impacted because Europeans decide to go out and explore the world. And remember, they're not really going out to explore. They're going out to get to China. They had one goal, and that was their one goal. It was only after they realized that there's these other lands and resources along the way that we would really say they start to explore. And that's why sometimes it's called the Age of Discovery, because it's Europeans discovering there's a whole world out there they didn't know about. Right? So we're going to look at each of these, and we're going to look at supporting views and opposing views. So what was one nation's view of a situation, and then what was another nation's view on a situation. So this is what we're going to look at first. We're going to look at exploration in general, and then we're going to look at colonies in the Americas, and then the British colonies in the Americas, trade and colonies in Asia, and then trade and colonies in Africa. All right, so of course, we have to go back to the beginning. European exploration begins because of God, gold, and glory, those 3 G's, right? So the Catholic faith wants to go out and spread the faith to the world. The more people that know about their faith, the more people they will save. It's a good thing. It's great. And if you are a Catholic king, it is your obligation to spread your faith, because this is the time of divine right. And divine right is when kings and people understand that kings are put into power because God deemed it so, right? I want to thank God for putting me here, right? It's not the age of I want to thank me. No, it's I want to thank God. And so God puts the kings on the throne, and therefore the kings are sort of a portal for God to speak through. And so it is the king or queen's obligation to support their faith, to spread their faith, and to be a role model of their faith. And we know sometimes what happens when we get role models, right? And then, of course, gold, looking for wealth for individuals and for nations, and glory. And again, that is for individuals and for nations. All right, so what do we see? Well, the Europeans saw this as an opportunity to control trade from Asia. Remember the demise of the Silk Road. Goods that Europeans wanted from Asia had become very expensive. And so they saw as an opportunity, well, I can go fix that problem. I can be the solution. I'll bring the trade goods in, and I'll make wealth at the same time. All right, more wealth from exports. Again, there's that gold, right? I can become wealthy. A nation can become wealthy. So if you control the trade as a nation, such as the Dutch East India Company, it was the nation of Holland that benefits, the nation of the Netherlands that benefits, but also individual people are going to benefit because of that. And of course, if you're a Catholic nation like Portugal, Spain, or France, you are looking to spread your faith of Catholicism, right? And save those savage souls. All right, so that is a European viewpoint on this, right? And also, if you're a king or a queen, this is going to bring glory to your nation. The more land that you can stick your flag on, then the greater your nation will be. People will look to you with respect. All right, how do the native people in Asia view this? Okay, well, they were all about increased trade, because increased trade means they're making money. You're paying them in silver, and so that's what they want. So They didn't mind having more trade. They also get access to new science and math knowledge. That they were interested, both China and Japan both valued science, especially information about astronomy, math, anything that they saw as useful to expanding their knowledge base. Okay. And so, of course, the tools and technologies. So remember, the Dutch are really the high point of glass making. And when I say glasses, I'm talking about lenses, not drinking glasses. Okay. So therefore, you're going to get telescopes. Eventually, you're going to get microscopes. You're going to get the spy glasses that the sailors are using, eyeglasses, prisms. All of this is an interesting item to purchase as far as the Chinese and Japanese are considered, right? And if it's books, it's not like Pride and Prejudice they want to read, or Sense and Sensibility. They want books about math. They want books about science. Okay. They see no need for a new religion. They have few religions. You have Taoism, you have Buddhism. They've been fine for a few thousand years. They don't need anything else. All right. Although in the beginning you get a few early converts, no desire to change their culture. They're pretty proud of who they are. They don't see any need to sit at a table or to use a cutlery, to use a fork. They're good. Thank you very much, but no thank you. All right. So now let's look as we advance, and Europeans realize that there's two large continents, the Americas, and they start to colonize. And so we have New Spain, New France, and New England. Remember, Portugal gets Brazil, and the rest, Portugal's sort of kicked to the curb in the Americas because of the Treaty of Tordesillas. All right. So as far as the European nations see this is a great way. They can bring in finished goods. People going to the colonies are going to want the same things that they have from home, and so they're going to have to buy it. And it's like buying a summer home. They're going to have to buy furniture for that summer home. They have to decorate that summer home. They're going to have plates and clothes. And so, as far as tradesmen back in Europe, they're thrilled with this, right? Increase from power. So we're going to see Spain, France, and England specifically start to gain power. In the beginning, you do see the Dutch and the Swedish trying to claim land and begin colonies. They don't last too long. They're pushed out by those bullies, the British. All right. Increased wealth from new resources. So hot diggity dog. England wants a navy. New England is bursting to the seams with tall pine trees. And these are going to be claimed by the king. And in fact, there's actually a job where you work for the king and you mark trees that are over 2 foot across because they're going to be used for masts on the Navy ships. All right. So there's wealth for the nation. There's power for the nation. You have fur traders and trappers. You have fishermen. You have shipbuilding because, my goodness, you need a way to transport all these goods. So there's just jobs exploding in the colonies. And also back in England and France and Spain and the Netherlands, because of this, you're going to have increase in shipbuilding. You're going to have an increase in merchants in Europe. So everyone in Europe thinks that the colonies are a fantastic idea at this point. Okay. And for Catholic nations like Spain and France and Portugal, this is another opportunity to spread the Catholic faith. All right. Also, more land, because they have gotten better at farming in Europe at this point. There's a population explosion. And so, hey, let me ship some people over there. All right. Now, how do the native people in the Americas view this? They don't have the same view. They notice increased death from disease, right? These European diseases, the American people in the Americas were isolated. And so all of a sudden this disease comes in and it spreads. And if you can think about, if you're able to go back and think about when COVID first came to where you live, at first no one had COVID, no one had even heard of it. And then a few people come in, maybe from travel, and it starts to spread. And then next thing, months later, it's an epidemic and it's a problem and a concern. So that's what the Native Americans were going through, the same thing. They're also losing hunting lands. And think of it this way. They're losing hunting lands for two reasons, especially in the British colonies. Okay. They're losing hunting lands because the people are coming in and they're wanting to farm the land, which means they're cutting down the trees and they're taking the land for farming use. So that completely wipes out the hunting land. They're also being pushed off their land and told, no, this is our town. This is our village. You can't come in here. This is our forest. And so they're being removed from the hunting land. So it's really a double hit to the Native Americans, and then you throw in that disease with it. For those Native Americans that were unfortunate enough to live where the Spanish settled, they have the encomienda system where the Spanish law said that if there were people living on your land, they now became your slaves. Bonus, right? Not to say that the British weren't doing the same thing, but that'll be the next page. They did have an interest to manufacture goods. So we're going to see other nations do too. Hey, I can use a metal pot and pan to cook over a fire. Bonus, right? Cloth that's already woven and ready to be cut into clothes. Bonus. All right. And of course, guns, because hey, you're going to sell me some guns. They might be really bad guns, but if you're trying to hunt or protect yourself, a bad gun's better than no gun if the other person doesn't have one, right? Okay, and so they have an opposite understanding of wealth and power. The Aztecs and Incas didn't see gold as valuable. They saw it as beautiful, but they didn't see that as a definition of wealth. Okay, they had other ways of measuring it. And the Native Americans also didn't see owning land as a source of wealth, right? There were other ways that you proved that you had power and respect. So they were willing to share the land. They didn't see the idea of giving up the use of the land or giving it over to somebody. It's like, oh, that's why the natives got along well with the French in the beginning, the fur traders, because like, hey, we're just here to trap some fur with you. Okay, let's do this. And you know what? If you trap furs, you can make money from it too, or get trade goods from it. So they didn't in the beginning see that as a bad thing. And this, of course, is going to lead to some problems. But the main reason the natives, they did resist. Okay, let's not think that they didn't resist. But again, the Europeans have a stronger military, more technology. So even though there's less of them, we have the natives who are getting beaten down by these diseases. But it's the military technology that the Europeans have that allow them to take over so easily. All right, so let's talk about the British colonies. All right, they serve England, and quite honestly, all of the colonies were made to serve their mother country. Right, France saw New France as a way to benefit France, and New Spain was supposed to benefit Spain, and Portugal would benefit. Brazil would benefit Portugal. Easy for me to say. Right, you have the Dutch, New Amsterdam. You have the Swedish and New Sweden. And all of the European countries are going to control trade. This is called mercantilism. So they are going to make sure their people are paying taxes. So if there's a resource where you live and you're selling it and it's getting shipped back to your mother country, you're going to pay taxes on whatever money you make. All right. Taxes are forever and have been around forever. They're also going to try to tell you who you can sell to. So in the case of England, they actually had what were called navigation acts, meaning that if you were a rice plantation owner, your rice should get sold to the English. Even if the English were going to pay you a lower cost, you should sell only to the English. And by the same token, if you're a plantation owner, a rice plantation owner in South Carolina, and you want some sugar for your family, you should buy sugar from a British sugar plantation or a British merchant, even if the Dutch merchants are willing to sell it to you cheaper. So with the colonies, the Europeans are wanting to control not only who they sell to and at what price they sell their items for, but who they buy from. And there's a whole lot of smuggling going on during this time. A whole lot of smuggling and pirating. Europeans, especially England, sees this again, their tiny island. There's an opportunity for their population to move there. And, we've got a lot of poor people. Let's send them to work over there. Great opportunity for them. Also, you have a lot of people with a lot of wealth, especially the younger sons who are not going to gain dad's mansion, not going to gain dad's land and rentals, but they do have money. So this is an opportunity for them. All right. And the colonists owe England for protection. So as far as the mother countries are concerned, and this, of course, we're talking about England here. This is what really leads to part of the problems that lead to the American Revolution, is that England sees that the colonists owe them. They're sending soldiers to protect them. They are buying from them, right? So you owe us. And that's an attitude that's going to prevail. Now, how do the natives view the British colonists? Pretty much the same way we just talked about. The idea is, let's just share the land. There's plenty of land for everybody. Why would you take? And probably the best person historically that we have would be William Penn. He was pretty honest with the Native Americans, Lenape, and eventually the Delaware. And he makes treaties with them and actually keeps his word on the treaties. He's probably one of the few Europeans that we have that did that. And even later on with the Americans who constantly broke the treaties. All right. The natives also say, hey, England, you were not doing well. You had quite a few failed colonies, and you would not have survived. Jamestown would not have made it. The people at New Plymouth would not have made it. Massachusetts Bay couldn't have made it without the help of native people, right? And that using resources is good. I mean, natives lived off the land. They have no problem with using what the land gives you, but cutting it down and digging it up just to sell it for wealth, that didn't make sense to them. All right, so why are you cutting down this forest? You need to cut down a forest because you're building your home. That makes sense. You're cutting down a forest because you're sending the lumber away across the ocean. That didn't make sense to them. All right, and then if we talk about the colonists who move and settle into the British colonies, they see themselves still as English citizens. They really don't see themselves as being in a new land. And so they want the same political rights, the same rights of the Enlightenment that we're going to talk about. And of course, that's going to be part of the reasons for as we go into the American Revolution. So these colonists, the people who are moving from England to New England, the middle colonies, southern colonies, they don't think of themselves as Americans. They think of themselves as British citizens building a new land. All right, Asia. All right, trade, faith, and resources. All right, so with Asia, the Europeans saw Asia as that was the Holy Grail. That's what starts everything, right? This is their opportunity to gain wealth through trade because they already know they have buyers for what they can bring in, okay? And they want to open up many trading ports. So the more trading posts that they have on the coast, they not only have safe harbors for their ships, but there's more opportunity for wealth and trade. They also want to control a trade of specific resources. So this is where we see the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Trading Company coming in. These are massive companies. And they're going to take over. So we see the Dutch monopolize and take over the Spice Islands. Eventually, we're going to see Britain want to take control of India, right? The French are going to go into East Asia. And the Dutch, of course, are at Nagasaki trading with the Japanese. So people are trying to claim ports and posts and sort of say, hey, I'm your friend, trade with me. Don't trade with them, just trade with me. And because then, again, you're going to get more wealth. And for those Catholic nations, they are also looking as an opportunity to, again, spread their faith. Now, how do the natives view this? How do people in Japan and India and China view this? Well, if people want to buy from them, That's great. There's more opportunity for them to make money. They don't have a problem with trade. They only want to open a few trading ports, though. They're willing to sell. They just don't want all the people that are coming in. They don't want the influence. They want to sort of keep them wrapped up just at the trading ports, tell them where they can come and go, and they want to control trade. Right? So China has eventually develops a closed door policy for trade. No, they're not trading at all. If they're going to trade, they'll send their trade goods to Nagasaki, Japan, and the Dutch can pick up trade goods there. They're just really done. Right? They have no interest in it. They don't want to buy anything. They expect respect. And the Dutch are really the only ones who are willing to do that with the kowtowing and giving gifts to the emperor. And the only thing they want is silver. They really have no use for this European trade unless they're selling. Japan begins isolation from foreigners, again, except for the Dutch, but even that's a very controlled situation. There's even laws of penalty of death if you even so much as talk to a foreigner. So if you're Japanese and you have a shipwreck, if a foreign nation's ship picks you up in the ocean, you can't go back home because you will be killed. All right. It was very, very severe. They talk about strict parents. They wanted to completely isolate their nation, and they did for 200 years. And as far as the view of Europeans, they're like, you want to take us on, bring it on, because we're equals. Military technology, we got it. Centralized government, we got it. We can take you out. So don't even try. We're going to make the rules. And if you want to trade with us, you're going to follow these rules. It's a little bit different in India because they did not have a centralized government. They had many princes or princedoms throughout India. So if you look at India a little bit closely, you'll see many more trading posts within India. We see the same thing in the Spice Islands because they don't have a centralized government. They don't have a strong central military, which is what we see in China and Japan. All right, what about Africa? Right, well, I think this pretty much says it all. Trade, ports, and slaves. All right, so the Europeans, they need their coastal ports. Getting to Asia is a very, very long route. This is months long. You need a place. These are pit stops, right? These are rest stops. These are rest stops for the Europeans. They need coastal ports where they can stop. They can take on fresh water. They can repair their ships. If there's a storm and they survive the storm, if you have a crew that gets sick, you need a place that you can come in and rest and repair. All right. There's also the slave trade. So there's an opportunity to take the resources, which are humans, out and trade them. There's a little bit of gold and black pepper trade going on, but of course, it's completely dominated by the slave trade. And there's people willing to buy cheap finished goods, guns, cloth, and pots and pans. So just like the natives in the Americas see these finished goods as something that they don't have the technology to build them, they don't have factories. They see this, the native people say, oh, this is a good purchase for us. Okay. Now, Native Africans, again, they have no problem with these cheap finished goods. This seems to be a good thing for them, right? But we also see warlords rising to power because those who do get involved in the slave trade are getting the guns. And so if you have the guns, you can take over neighboring tribes. And so we see this unequal balance of power. There's not a balance of power within Africa because of the slave trade. But we also see an extreme change in culture and societies. Again, because you have warlords taking over areas where different tribal nations were before. And within Africa, lots of times people think of it as a country. It's a continent. So just like if you go to North America and you're going to experience very different cultures and languages throughout North America, traveling to Africa is the same, just like in Europe, different languages, different cultures, right? Africa is the same way. But because of these warlords rising to power, you have a different balance of which nations and languages and cultures gain power, and some that seem to almost disappear. You're also going to get a lot of famine and war. First of all, if you're trying to not get caught by a slave trader, you don't have time to farm, right? You also have people being killed because of these wars. You also have the millions of people taken out. Think about who's being taken out of Africa. The healthy people of working age. So we're looking at people from age 8 or 10 up to maybe age 30. What do you have left? What's left behind for some of these nations are very old people and very young people. It's very hard for them to continue on. And so a lot of famine, a lot of war within Africa. All right. Now, not everybody was willing to take on and join in with the slave trade. And there's one particular person who comes to mind. That's Queen Nzinga, who did a great job resisting, especially the Portuguese slave traders. And if you get into her territory, then you are safe from slave trade. So there is resistance within Africa. Not everybody said, yes, I'm going to sell my neighbor. But there was a lot of it. But there is resistance. Just like there's resistance to slavery once people get to the Americas, people try to run and get away. So this was not just an easy flip the switch and everything went to the slave trade. There was quite a bit of resistance within Africa. All right, so now we're back in Europe. Science revolution, faith, reason, and tradition. So here we're looking at the science revolution, the Enlightenment, Peter the Great, and Catherine the Great. And a little bit different here, we're looking at supporting and opposing views, okay? Because this is happening within Europe, and then Peter and Catherine are happening within Russia. And so it's all the same people that we're looking at. So with the science revolution, people who support it are going to use observation and reason to learn. They're right. They're using a scientific method, that Baconian method of testing and retesting, of starting from nothing, not making any assumptions. People who support the science revolution are not in competition with anybody. They are seeking answers to questions. They are using facts and truth and math. This is math's glory days, right? And this is the time of switching a belief to a heliocentric universe or sun-centered universe, right? And understanding more about the universe. So people who are against these changes and against science want to use tradition to learn. My dad told me, his grandfather told him, this is what we know. This is what we know, and we're not going to question. The sun rises. Oh, the sun rises. Okay, so it's the sun that's moving. I can see it. No sense to question it. The church is the source of truth. So if you want to know more about the world, ask questions within the church. The church knows all. Geocentric universe, earth-centered. Again, tying in with people like Ptolemy and Aristotle, the ancient philosophers, and then the church writings that support those ancient writings. So therefore you have two separate groups, and they're both in agreement. And so this must be the truth. And again, the science revolution is when they really start testing a lot of Aristotle's beliefs and teachings, and a lot of his science ideas were wrong because of how he went around, how he looked at it. And he thought reason was, this is what I observe, this is what I see, so therefore it is. What Aristotle didn't do is the testing. Still a smart guy, though, right? And people who are against this idea of believing in science or trusting science fear a loss of power for the church and for kings with divine right. Remember the idea that kings are granted their power because of their faith, because God puts them there. And so if you are starting to question what the church has taught, you might also question your king or queen. Which moves us into the Enlightenment, again happening in Europe. And their key word there is liberty. All right. So with the Enlightenment, people who support the Enlightenment are using observation and reason to make society better. They look for a balance of power. They want constitutional monarchs. They still believe you need government. Government has a purpose to protect the people, but that there should be a balance of power within that government. Believe in natural laws and liberty. Liberty is a big word at this time, freedom. Right? And a social contract, an agreement between the people and their leader. And what does that entail? And discussions of what are your liberties, what are your freedoms, and how much freedom should an individual have versus society, versus what is the government's job to protect those freedoms. All right. And people who are against Enlightenment, we're especially going to see the church is not as much, and monarchs, because again, if you are a king or queen, an absolute ruler, you want absolute and total power, you believe that God has put you into power. And so if you're supposed to be asking the people for their opinion and granting people certain rights and treating people equally, it reduces the power of the king. Okay. And so people that also were against it would say that people don't know enough. People aren't smart enough to rule. They don't have advisors. And so you need a strong ruler to guide them. And you have people like Thomas Hobbes who would say people are nasty and brutal and need that strong ruler. And then you have people like Rousseau and Locke who say, no. It's the environment that people are in. And if it's a good environment, people will do well. Right. And so we have talking about the leaders of the Enlightenment. We have Montesquieu, which is looking for the balance of power that he sees in England and checks and balances within a government, divided power. All right. Separate branches of government. We have Voltaire, who definitely speaks about liberty and freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Voltaire brings up the idea of separation of church and state. In other words, the church should do its church thing and the government should do its government thing. And the government should not use church laws to govern. That they should be separate ideals. Okay. Which even in England at this time, that goes back and forth. And so we saw with the English Civil War, it went from a time of a ruler people got mad about because King Charles II, he was acting too Catholic. And then they put Oliver Cromwell in, who's a Puritan and who does the same thing that we see in the New England colonies. And the laws are based on what a Puritan believes. So both of those, during the English Civil War, you went from one ruler using his beliefs to help govern, and then the next ruler used his beliefs, although they were different, to also govern. And again, that's where Montesquieu says that checks and balances will come in and you can prevent those problems. When Voltaire goes a step further and says the government should have nothing to do with freedom of speech, he would also say you have to say the truth. Okay, you can have an opinion, but your opinion has to be the truth. You can't just go making up lies about people. And they also say that within those freedoms, this is that social contract, your freedoms can't overtake my freedoms. So you don't have the freedom to just take items from a store because you want them, because that takes away from the life and pursuit of happiness of that store owner, that merchant. All right, so let's move to Russia. All right, meanwhile, they've sort of been sitting over in Russia. And they're doing some trade with, they want to do some trade with Japan and China too. much, much more limited. All right. So the two that we're going to talk about from Russia are Peter and Catherine the Great. All right. So with Peter, he wants to modernize and westernize Russia. He is known as the father of the Russian Navy. And if you have a navy, you need warm water ports, not only to protect and defend your nation, but for trade. And he creates an empire, and in doing so, gains some warm water ports. He also introduces schools for boys of nobility, not schools for everybody. Okay? And remember, he's the anti-beard guy. You have to pay a tax if you want to keep your beard because European men don't wear beards. And he wants the men to dress more like European men do, and women also. He actually brings women out of the woodwork a little bit. So he says, yeah, women can be at parties and should be in parades. They should be there supporting. But even that's a more modern idea than the way Russia saw women before then. So he's definitely not supporting women like we would think of in today's age, but he made minor steps to recognizing women's role in society. Minor. Okay. So people who didn't like him, right? If you were in Russia at that time, the boyars, those landowners, the nobles, they're not happy. They're being told how to dress. They're being told that they have to meet with Peter the Great and modernize their lives. They're not fans of this. Okay. They see it as a loss of Russian culture. They also see Peter as an absolute ruler. Remember, he is a czar, right? Other czars were absolute rulers also, but he is brutal. He's going to do what he has to get the job done. And so there's a lot of death during this time. Death from creating that empire, death from people going against him, and even his own family members who spoke out against him, some lost their lives. So he doesn't take any backtalk. He doesn't want to hear your opinion on anything. He is definitely an absolute ruler who absolutely and totally takes power and control. All right. And then we have Catherine, who comes after Peter the Great. She marries Peter the Third. Right. And again, she sees Peter as her mentor. Like, who do you want to be like? Who do you want to be like as a ruler? Well, she wants to be like Peter the Great, Peter the First. Okay. And so she wants to modernize and westernize Russia even more than he did. Continue with that. She also sees the need for more warm water ports. And she becomes what is known as an enlightened despot. And so if you were like, hey, thumbs up for Catherine, the Voltaire called her the North Star, right? Diderot came and hung out with her. She is friends, and she is a pen pal of these thinkers and philosophers hanging out in France during the Enlightenment. And she's all in. She is talking the talk. Okay, so she's entertaining and interesting to be around. She's expanding the empire, so Russia's gaining more respect. She creates a school for girls in nobility, and not just a school for girls to learn how to be a nice young lady, but actually has them learning science and math and geography, which was completely unheard of at that point in Russia. She supports science. Remember, she is the first in Russia to become inoculated for smallpox. So she is also a leader that way and sees it as a way to benefit her country. Now, there's also plenty of haters about for Catherine. Probably even more so than Peter the Great, right? She definitely wants to take away power from the boyars, those noblemen. And in the ideas of enlightenment, if everybody is equal, nobody should be better just because of their last name or the family that you're born into. Everyone should have equal rights and equal rights before the courts. Right? The boyars said, no, that's a stupid idea. And if you do that, we will remove you from power. A lot of people saw her as taking away Russian culture because she is fangirling over everything French, French music, French arts, French thinkers. But she is an absolute ruler. So she talked the talk about the Enlightenment ideas, but she didn't walk the walk, right? And just like Peter, if you go against her, you're probably going to end up dead. There's quite a few stories about her and how she sort of enjoyed hearing about death and destruction that her wars caused. She takes the throne in coup d'etat. She was not given power. So while her husband signed power over to her by abdicating, there's more to the story behind that. And she gets the military support with her. She puts on a military uniform, borrows a general's swords, and goes marching in and captures Peter, the second her husband. And over a long discussion, he decides to go ahead and sign over power to her. And then there's also the story of he dies 9 days later. So she's not Russian born, she's Prussian born, right? She's also a female. And so a lot of people don't like her, don't trust her, don't see her as being worthy of being in power because of that at that time, right? And there's too many wars. And we know that she did at least have some semblance of a heart, because we know that Voltaire spoke to her about the Russo-Turkish War. And she mentioned about all the lives. And he said, don't worry, King Louis probably killed more people with his fireworks than died in the Turkish War, which I can't honestly believe that was true. So if you're going to be a leader, you're going to have haters. You can just look at whoever's leading your nation and see there's plenty of haters on both sides, right? And then we have to, as historians, we have to look back and say, well, what do we value? And was she good or bad? There's another Catherine de Medici of France, who is probably equal. She probably vies for the most hated with Catherine the Great. And again, another woman who is an extremely strong ruler. And I think that history probably looks on women rulers with a little bit different eye than sometimes we look at male rulers, just because they were more the norm, right? All right, so both greats. So how do we compare the 1500s to the 1700s? All right, what do they have in the same? Let's look there first. Well, you still have strong kings in power. You still have faith and church being very, very important. Remember, Catherine and Peter the Great being the emperors, they are also the head of the Russian church, right? You have King Louis, the King Louis of France, who are ruling by divine right. You have Oliver Cromwell over in England taking power from King Charles II. Faith is very strong. You have the English Parliament wanting William of Orange, King James' husband, coming over from the Netherlands to rule because he's Protestant. So faith plays an extremely important role in history during this time. And many, many people don't have liberty or freedoms. More people, we could probably say, don't have freedoms than not, although it improves slightly. Right. And that's why the colonies in the Americas seem like such a great opportunity for people, is because it's a chance, especially for English people, to have more freedoms. And not so much in New Spain. Right. So let's look at the 1500s. In the 1500s, wealth and power was based on a feudal system of land ownership. All right. Science is based on tradition in the 1500s. There's the divine right of kings that's really not questioned. God puts kings into power. And churches teach the truth. So if you want to know what the truths are, the church was going to have the answers for you. As we move into the 1700s, we see this rise of mercantilism, that wealth is gained through trade and merchants, and that nations should control trade. Science is real. Like there's even the word science. There's the idea that there is a way to find answers using reason and observation and testing. A huge increase of the middle class. So because we have mercantilism, which is a large increase in trade, we have an increase in the middle class, all the people that support trade. Empires develop. Because of the increase in colonies, we have the Russian Empire that develops also, but you have the British Empire that expands, France, Portugal, Holland, the Netherlands, huge amount of increased trade. And so because of that, this is where also you want to think of it more in a way that's more relevant. Food changes. Think of what foods we associate with European countries. If I think of Swiss and France or Germany, I think of chocolate. Well, chocolate comes from the Americas, right? Sugar came from Asia and Africa. And so most of the chocolate I eat is going to have sugar and milk in it with the chocolate. And so Europeans are the one who create the chocolate that we think of today, but it came about because of that age of discovery. How about Italian spaghetti sauce or pizza, right? Pizza has a tomato sauce. Well, tomatoes came from the Americas. French fries, which we know really come from Belgium, right? Potatoes, that came from the Americas. So many of the foods that we think of, apple trees, if you think of apple pie in America, right? Well, apples came from Europe. Apples are not native to the Americas. And so horses are not native to the Americas. Pigs and cows, not native to the Americas. You think of, barbecue, right? Well, barbecue is probably made with something, an animal that originated in Europe, but the word barbecue comes from a native language. The word hurricane comes from the Tanyas, where Columbus first landed. And Columbus is the first European to witness a hurricane. And so there's such that transfer of ideas, and that's what's known as the Columbus Exchange, is this transfer of ideas and disease and wealth back and forth. And so some things that transfer are good, some things that transfer are terrible, but it definitely changed the world, right? Think of spices that you have that you don't even think twice about using in your home. And so this is really if you were living in Europe in the 1700s, you would probably think you were in the most modern of times, that you know so much about the world. Because, oh my gosh, just look back 200 years in history and they knew nothing about the world. So just like now in the 2000s, right, or the 2000s, we can look back and say, the 1800s, they didn't know that much about the world. These are some of their ideas. So if you look back 200 years and compare what you have now to then, it would just be like someone in the 1700s looking back on the 1500s and say, those poor people that had no technology, they weren't modern at all. So lots of change. And if we summarize 200 years, it's changed. But honestly, any time in history, we can usually look back 100 years, definitely 200 years, and see change. There's going to be some change, but huge changes, and these are the specific ones that we see.